This is Grid 2, sequel to the BAFTA award-winning race driver Grid. As your keen detective skills will have informed you, it's a game about racing cars around. Fast. It's also, you might have noticed, one of the prettiest races on the console, lavished with more glittering decoration than Liberace's Christmas tree. This is proper end-of-the-generation stuff.
Okay, buddy, this is the chance we've been waiting for. Prove yourself out here today, and it could get us into the big time.
It's also worth mentioning that this isn't really a simulation in any sense of the word. There's definitely subtlety and weight to the handling, but even in the grippier cars you'll find yourself sliding around the place like some wag has sneakily buttered your tyres. Codemasters have clearly decided that just clinging to the racing line is a bit dull, so while you can do that and you'll probably be quick, you won't be penalised too much for lighting up the rears. Which is cool in an arcadey sort of way, not least because it's relatively easy to control those slides. Well, most of the time. Still, check out that damage model. It's even more detailed than the previous game, though we do miss the option to slowly rewind the action in the new, lengthier flashbacks and watch every single panel delicately uncrumple itself. Providing structure for all the drama on track is Codemasters' latest stab at introducing a narrative to the racing genre. The story, such as it is, involves you teaming up with a multi-millionaire called Patrick Callahan, who has a dream of setting up a sort of World Series of Racing, called the World Series of Racing, that will unify American, European and Asian racing styles into a single global challenge. That means big fat American muscle cars bouncing off nippy Japanese tuners around the streets of Paris. Most of the plot's revealed through menu screen voiceovers, so don't expect Dostoevsky-style literary chops. It's all extremely light touch, with ESPN-branded live-action cutscenes few and far between. The majority of your time is spent staring at a list of available events. Where the storyline does have an impact is in the structure of the career mode. For a game based on the thrill of driving fast, Grid 2's career mode is remarkably slow out of the blocks. Because you're building the WSR's reputation in 3 separate continents, the first 3 seasons involve races that revisit the same locations multiple times in quick succession, and much as there are different routes through each city, they're all still variations on a theme. It can make the early stages feel a bit grindy as you work towards the season finale. The rate at which you unlock cars is tightly controlled too. Rather than earning cash to buy new vehicles, you're offered a choice of 2 similarly spec'd rides at specific junctures in the career mode, with an option to win the other in a special promo event. Clearly Codemasters is never going to be able to boast a car list the size of a Forza or a Gran Turismo, but it still feels like this system highlights the lack of choice rather than mitigates it. I never felt a particular connection or ownership pride with any of the cars I was using. It was just a case of picking the right turbocharged tool for the job. That's not to say there aren't some cool cars in here. We were pleased to see the stately Mercedes 190e Evo 2 get an outing, and at the top end you'll be driving modern GT3 racing machinery, but none of them ever felt like our car. They're basically the same ones everyone who plays this game will end up with. It's the same with the system that allows you to select sponsors for your cars. I just found myself hitting the randomise button more often than not, because without the financial incentive of new cars to buy, there was little benefit to gaming the system. Weirdly, the online mode has a more traditional cash, XP and upgrade structure, and while progress there is relatively slow too, it's arguably the more satisfying progression curve. We're left wondering why they didn't just use something similar for the single player. Still, while it's all a bit muddled, the Grid brand of dramatic racing remains intact. It's a more muscular physical take on motorsport than you get in Forza. Almost every overtaking move involves hurling the car into a corner and just about catching it in time to avoid the wall on the outside. There are obvious highlights too. The new point-to-point races, which tend to be full of sweeping high-speed corners, are usually a treat. They really emphasise the speed and danger of motor racing, something that television cameras tend to scrub off when you're watching a real race. We're particularly enamoured with the courses set in the Hong Kong hills, with the city laid out below you. Less convincing are the live routes races, which dynamically change city courses as you drive them. As a novelty they're sort of fun, but we didn't expect them to appear quite so frequently in the single player mode. Still, if you just sort of switch your brain off and drive in autopilot, they're not too challenging. By contrast, the drift events are actually more palatable than they were in the previous Grid game. For a start, they take place on winding mountain routes rather than a dockyard, and secondly, they're far more accessible. Our pro tip is not to try too hard to drift the car, just drive normally and aim to get as close to the racing line as you can. The back end will naturally step out, racking up the points, and there are big multipliers to be earned just by getting close to the apex of the corner. Elsewhere there are Overtake Challenges, which ask you to chain together overtakes without hitting anything, and Toge events, which are a 2-car chase along those epic point-to-point routes, both of which are a pleasing change when they crop up in the career. Grid 2 is certainly an entertaining, visually arresting racer, but we can't shake a lingering feeling that it's a less substantial single-player game than its predecessor. Perhaps it's just a trick of the confused career mode progression. After all, there's a healthy number of circuits and variants on paper, but the end result is the same. It just feels a bit flimsier, like it's spreading its content just a touch too thinly. The result is a game that's probably best enjoyed in short, intense doses in single player, before the grind has a chance to get you down. Because of that, we reckon plenty of people will find the multiplayer more rewarding, with its more logical progression, varied sequences of events, and less constrained choice of cars. There's even a system to make sure griefers are contained in their own little playpen away from people taking things seriously. So, the verdict. Ultimately, Grid 2 is a spectacular dynamic racing game lumbered with a really unflattering structure. No matter how exciting your first race around the Yas Marina circuit is, for example, the next 2 consecutive ones are going to feel like a bit of a chore. Which is a shame really, because every so often you'll have a hard-fought race at an entirely new location and finish with your car barely held together, and you'll remember that there's some things Grid does better than any other racing game.